Good evening, everyone. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. We have a great show for you today, so hit that like button as you come on. There are decades where it seems like not much happens, and weeks where decades happen. And this week is one of those latter weeks. The SCO summit in Tianjin, China, saw the biggest economies and militaries in the multipolar world get even closer and declare moves that are already shaking the Trump administration. From a new governance initiative to a historic Siberia pipeline deal between Russia and China, China and India ties warming and new commitments among the most important leaders in the global south to move away from the US dollar, Trump's attack on BRICS is backfiring harder and harder. To discuss all of this and more, I have a very special panel for all of you today. First, we have Carl Zha. He is the host of Silk and Steel podcast. Carl, good to see you again.
Always, Danny. Thanks for inviting me.
Then we have Dr. Warwick Powell. He is a senior fellow at Taihe, and he is a geopolitical analyst as well. Warwick Powell, good to see you.
Great to see you too, Danny.
Great.
And you too, Carl.
Hey, you too, Warwick.
And then we have, for the first time on the show, joining us from Tianjin, China, is Dr. Da Hui from Tsinghua Daxue, or Tsinghua University. He is the director for the Center for International Strategy, Security and Strategy there at Tsinghua. Dr. Da Hui, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, good to see you, Danny. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Amazing. Yes. And I'm very happy to have you on this program for the first time. But let us get started and review. As everyone hit that like button again, that will help boost this in the algorithm. But we are going to get started on the first story. So I wanted to talk about the developments at the SCO summit. There were many. The big one, of course, was the gathering of the RIC, China, Russia, and India. These were the scenes that were showing all across social media and Western mainstream media, even as they panicked about these leaders coming together. Xi Jinping and Modi met on the sidelines. Putin and Xi Jinping are having extended talks as we speak at Xi Jinping's residence following this. There are also concrete announcements that I'd like to open with you, Carl, if I could, that have a significant impact on the global financial system. We have the SCO integrating with BRICS to the point of China advancing another development bank, this one an SCO development bank, to curb the risks of the US dollar. China has invested 2 billion RMB for SCO members to get this initiative going. And then we also have Vladimir Putin at the SCO summit. He proposed, Carl, that members of the SCO began issuing their own joint bonds for a very similar purpose, to help SCO countries and by extension, multipolar world countries be able to avoid some of the risks associated with the dollar. Now, all of this came together, Carl, with the tariff frenzy that Donald Trump leveled on India. Of course, it began with China, then the whole world, and now here we are. So your reaction to all of these developments and their significance?
Well, you mentioned RIC. The grouping of Russia, India, China was originally a term proposed by Putin's predecessor as Russian prime minister. It was by Yevgeny Primakov. He first proposed RIC, Russia, India, China, as a alternative pole to the U.S. unipolar world back in 1999. And now we're finally seeing the fruition thanks to the Nobel Peace Prize candidate, Donald Trump. He gave this a big push. For the longest time, Russia particularly was interested in structuring this triangle of China, India, and Russia alignment against the U.S. But this is how the BRICS came about. From RIC came BRICS, but India for the longest time they have different ideas than the rest of the fellow BRICS members. on the vision for the BRICS, because for Russia and China, their idea of BRICS is as an alternative to the U.S. unipolar world order, and whereas India wants a alternative, but they don't necessarily want BRICS to be seen as anti-Western and anti-US, because India, for its part, is trying to improve its ties with the US, and it was hoping to gain from the what US have been pushing for of decoupling from China, the so-called China plus one strategy or the friendshoring strategy. To push multinational supply chains out of China, and India was hoping to gain a lot of the manufacturing that was coming out of China. And this, especially when Tim Cook said he will move more iPhone assembly line to India. And then comes Donald Trump. Donald Trump said, I didn't tell you I want to make iPhones in India. I want to make iPhone in the United States. And now he's slapping 50% tariff on India for basically over India's purchase of Russian oil, right? I mean, the largest purchasing of Russian oil is China and India. Trump realized he can't do anything about China because, that only will bring dial the clock back a couple months to the month of May, when there was over 100% tariff on both sides, and that led to Chinese ships stop coming to the port of Los Angeles, and there was widespread panic in U.S. worrying about shortages, and so they don't want repeat of that. And on top of that, China still has U.S. by the balls over the control of rare earth supply chain. Any U.S. company that hope to access Chinese rare earth production have to file application to the Chinese Commerce Department for a export license for the next 6 months. So Trump doesn't have any cards when it comes to play against China. But but Trump, being the type of person he is, he's a bully. The bully, they are afraid of the strong, but they will prey on the weak. And from Trump's perspective, India is a weaker part, and he feels like he can throw his weight around. And the whole reason he's going after India over purchase of Russian oil is because U.S. at this point, they're desperate to wind down the conflict in Ukraine. Now there has a very strong voice within the U.S. national security establishment to extricate from the quagmire as Ukraine, and to even extricate possibly from West Asia, so they can concentrate all their resources in the Western Pacific to contain China. But the problem is Trump administration still feel like they can dictate terms to Russia on how that peace or ceasefire is going to be structured. This is why Trump is applying high pressure tactic, according to his quote unquote art of deal, is trying to put additional pressure on Russia by cutting off fundings to the Russian state by, placing secondary sanction on purchasing of Russian oil. And he thought India is the weakest link of among the BRICS member nations. But to Indian leadership's credit, they had more backbones than the Europeans. Unlike the European leaders who made a beeline to Washington and sat like school children around White House waiting to be scouted, India actually stood their ground and defended their strategic autonomy. They refused to give up their traditional friendship with Russia, because India depended on Russia for weapon platform and energy. Trump wanted India to cut off that tie and switch to buy American oil and gas and American weapons. And India said, no, we can't do that. And Trump also wanted India to open its agricultural market to heavily subsidize U.S. farm produce. Now, India has 60% of its population labor force employed in the agricultural sector. There's no way, it's not politically feasible for any Indian leaders to say, okay, just go ahead and walk all over us, flood our market with American farm produce, put 60% of our labor force out of work. So India was was giving a big push to mend its ties with China. Because, by the way, that ever since the deadly 2020 border clash between India and China, both sides have been trying to repairing their relationship, because both India and China have realized this whole border conflict is counterproductive to their own priorities. For China, the priority is always the facing in the Western Pacific, trying to push the US out of East Asia. For India, it has other thing you prefer to deal with, and to spend the time and resources on the border clash is really a big distraction for both countries. So there were already negotiation well underway. All these planned visits, scheduled visits, these are all scheduled way in advance before Trump did his decree by tweet. But Trump certainly give it a big push for the India-China rapprochement. And that's what we saw yesterday and the day before during the SCO summit. And right now, India is showing US, hey, if you push us hard, we have alternatives. We have other friends we can turn to. We can turn to closer alignment with our fellow BRICS members. And US is India's #1 trade partner. China is India's #2 trade partner, right? And you mentioned about the alternative to the US dollar. The US dominance of international finance is one of the last pillars of the US empire. I say there are about 3 pillars that's popping up the US empire right now. It's military, technology, and finance. And right now, both military and technology pillars are kind of wobbly. Finance is US is really the last strongest pillar for its global hegemony. But US have been weaponized it to such extent that the more you use sanctions, the less effective it becomes, because then people seek alternative. When United States kicked Russia off the SWIFT system, Russia found ways around it. Now more countries adopt CISP, the alternative account settling system coming out of China. And other people are sitting up and taking notes. Oh, if US can freeze essentially taking money away from Russia's sovereign funds, then this could be happen to us if our money is in US dollar as well. So now everybody is seeking alternatives. This is why Brazilian President Lula has said, if we don't find a solution, if we don't find a alternative trade currency soon, we will end the 21st century the same way we started the 20th century. That's actually a very ominous warning, because the 20th century started with 2 world wars. And of course, Trump didn't like that once again, and he placed 50% tariff on Brazil, demanding they release Bolsonaro, a very blatant violation of Brazilian sovereignty and internal intervention into Brazilian internal matters. That just gives more impetus for all the BRICS member nations to working together, because China has already reduced their purchase of American farm produce. This is why Donald Trump wanted to open up Indian market. China already redirected purchase of soybeans and beef from United States to Brazil. This will just give more opportunity for all the BRICS members to work closely together. And I'm going on and on, so I'm gonna cut my time short and then let the rest of my panelists have a say.
Well, let me turn to you, Dr. Dahui, then. From your perspective out in China, what is the reaction to not only the SCO summit, but the fact that the conversation around it, especially on the West, on social media and elsewhere, is that this is a move toward de-dollarization, toward multipolarity. Do you see it this way?
Yes, of course. I think, but of course, this trend of this multipolarization, I don't think it starts from today. Of course, China has called for this, and India has called for this. I mean, for a very long time. Of course, Russia, and now the U.S. also believe that we are. I mean, Trump administration also say we are moving towards that direction. The speed of this move, I think, is different on different part of the multipolarization the so-called hard power part, I will say, move faster and also more obvious. But the softer side is relatively slow, including currency and including, we can say, softer power or narrative power. But of course, I think it's accelerating in past 1 year and in past several months. And this week, I think is very clear that it shows that this tendency. And watching all this happen, of course, China feels that particularly the visit of Indian leader Modi to China and joining the SEO summit. I think this is something really, really big given the backdrop of the Trump administration's, President Trump's attack and recent pressure on India. I think this, of course, changed the calculation of everyone. And I think I agree that this is President Trump make it possible for China, India, and Russian leaders standing together. And today in Beijing, we'll have military parade today. So we'll see, of course, Prime Minister Modi left China, but many, I think more than 20 country state leaders will be in Beijing and watching the parade here. I think that's also a show of called military power. Well, you asked about the finance currency de-dollarization, and of course India's role. I think this is my view is this is a long-term thing. It won't, of course, this summit and also announcement of the setting up the new bank. These are all the important developments. But I won't say one summit can change everything. And I think de-dollarization is a pretty long process. Gradually, actually, I think the portion of the using the US dollar as a reserve currency has declined gradually, slowly. I think this trend will continue. But so far, I don't think there are other, very obvious replacement of U.S. dollar at current phase. So I think this long, slow process will continue, and of course, there are also new trend in this regard. For example, the emergence of the digital currency, which could I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, but I think it could slow the process. It could accelerate the process, but it's a new factor. It's a new factor. I think the U.S. is moving very fast on this stablecoin thing, and I think China now is also speeding up. So these are the new factors. I think maybe if we are talking about the replacement of the U.S. dollar hegemony, my hunch is it won't be another currency, but the digital currency. But of course, it depends on which currency, what country states that kind of that digital currency. And I'm very glad that China-India relations is improving, thanks to President Trump's push. For whatever reason, China and India, these two countries are, both countries have 1.4 billion people. So the two most populous country in the world. Very sadly, our relations have been very difficult in past several years for many reasons. I think it is returning to the position that it should be. And I'm happy that India leader can be in China, and from China's perspective, India show another time its independent, its tradition of the independent diplomacy. Of course, India have this tradition, and of course, India is a respectful big country. I think, of course, they will act, basically following their own national interest. I'm not saying that China, India solve all the problem. Actually, the problem are still there. None of them can be easily solved. But I think it's good that the two leaders can talk to each other, the two countries can talk to each other. And I hope we can, through this process, we can normalize our high-level interaction. And I myself also very much hope that the two countries can normalize the people tie between these two, again, the most populous country in the world. This is really, really important for these 2.8 billion people. This is, almost, I think, 1/3 of the whole population on the earth. So if the two people can talk to each other, can interact to each other, if the political leader can talk to each other, work together, and if our economic tie can recover, then we have a lot of difficulties in the economic side. But actually, we do have potentials. I saw the news that the Indian government already say welcome China's no matter investment or increase the trade with India. I think this is very encouraging. We have great potential for cooperation, and China can play a role, helping India to build its manufacturing factor and also improve its infrastructure. And also India is a great market for Chinese companies. So all these potentials has been kind of capped or restrained in past few years. I hope now we can free those potentials. I do see the signals. The two leaders are working towards that direction. So all these are positive development. But of course, again, I'm not saying China, India, or other BRICS country we solve the problem between us. Actually, this is something very different from the Western alliance system. So for those BRICS countries, for China, India, Russia, and other Brazils, we have a lot of differences. We have disputes, but we try to maintain a relatively loose but more mutually respectful way to handle our bilateral relations, to keep those differences, but at the same time, to deliver this potential of the non-Western developing country. I think this is good for the whole world. Yeah, I think I will pause here.
Okay.
Yes, Danny.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Dr. Powell, to you, your analysis on the significance of the summit, the push and trend toward de-dollarization, and really what we saw was a major strengthening of BRICS through the SCO summit, which is historic in nature. Your assessment?
It's good to be with you, Danny. Look, I think that the first thing we just need to bear in mind is that these events and summits are punctuation moments in longer historical patterns and flows of forces. And these longer patterns are underpinned by transformations in economic relationships between countries, as well as the economic capabilities of different countries. The world today wouldn't be what it is had China not over the last 40 years emerged as the world's single and only manufacturing superpower. It is because of that many of these transformations that we're witnessing at a political level and at an institutional level are actually made possible. The trade patterns that have emerged over the course of the last 30 years has dramatically changed the configuration of the global economic landscape. 30 years ago, the global economic system was largely one that saw the United States economy particularly, as well as the Western European economy, occupy what is essentially a central position, a core, around which a periphery network of nations were connected largely through the supply of cheap goods, cheap labour, and as markets for advanced manufacturers where applicable. And all of that was held together, as Carl mentioned, by two core things. One is, of course, a military presence from the United States with over 800 bases scattered across the world to keep the disenfranchised under control. And, of course, the ability of the United States dollar to function as the medium of transactions that connected up these various networks around the world. That's what the world looked like then. The world today is one in which the United States has been decentered. The global trading system looks more like a network of relationships, almost like a neural network, where there are many different centers of activity and connection points, where countries have diverse relationships with each other. And as a result of that, are increasingly facing a need and an opportunity to settle their transactions with each other in mutually accessible, cheap, and safe ways, namely through a process of national currency adoption as a medium of exchange. So we're seeing, in some ways, the flip side of de-dollarization, so to speak, is what I tend to call currency multipolarity. And perhaps that's another way of thinking about this. It's not really about rejecting US dollars per se. It's actually using things that are more relevant, cheaper, safer, and easier to use, and without some of the risks that have emerged over the last few years. So that's the big backdrop. The moves towards currency multipolarity have taken many forms over the last 10, 15 years. We've seen the development of the institutional fabric that has made this possible, such as currency swap arrangements that have been expanding between the central banks of various countries in the global south. We are also seeing the development of technology systems which supports national currency settlements without having to rely upon a third-party currency, namely the US dollar and to some extent the euro. We have seen in the last 11 years or so the expanded use of non-SWIFT based bank-to-bank communications networks and settlement systems, to a point now where about 54% of China's trade is settled in RMB. Over 90% of China's trade with Russia is settled in either RMB or ruble. About 75% of Russia's trade with ASEAN is actually settled in national currencies. And a growing proportion of Russia's trade with India is settled in ruble, RMB, UAE dirham, or to some extent, and rupees, of course. So we are starting to see the gathering of momentum behind the adoption of different settlement currencies. And it's all happening because of the economic capabilities that have transformed and have been built in different countries. Of course, Carl touched on Brazil's President Lula, who's been at the forefront in many regards, certainly rhetorically, about posing the big question, which is, why on earth are two countries that don't involve the United States transacting with each other using an instrument issued by the United States? And that's actually a really sensible question, right? And historically, there's been lots of reasons why the US dollar has been used to enable unrelated states to conduct their business and settle accounts with each other, but increasingly there is no real reason why that's necessary. One of the reasons why there is a legacy or a hangover of the US dollar as a so-called global reserve currency is simply because the stock of US dollars in the global system is so large. US dollars don't disappear just because one country doesn't hold on to them. They end up somewhere, and the only time US dollars disappears in a net sense is when they're taxed out of existence by the US government, or when US dollar denominated debts are repaid and US dollars then are literally leached out of circulation. But other than that, we have, over the course of the last 70, 80 years, experienced a global economic system that has been the recipient, if you will, of large volumes of US dollars being created net, and consequently, there is a lot of US dollar stock in the global system, and that US dollar stock has to sit somewhere. So when, for example, countries or central banks end up with US dollars, they have some decisions to make. Do they hold those US dollars as dollars and earn very, very little interest? Or do they sell those dollars or use those dollars to exchange for something else? Obviously, many central banks will purchase other forms of securities, most of which are denominated in US dollars historically, such as US dollar treasury bonds. And the reason they do that is because they are extremely liquid and that they earn an interest, whereas the dollar doesn't. We have, of course, seen now in recent years the increased expansion of gold on the balance sheet of central banks, because central banks are buying gold with dollars. But don't forget, where there is a buyer, there is a seller. So those US dollars are still in the system somewhere. They're just not sitting on the balance sheet of central banks anymore. They're sitting on the balance sheets of organizations and institutions that once held the gold. So the evolution of the global financial system invariably takes time, because the stock of US dollars doesn't disappear tomorrow. It doesn't just vanish in a puff of smoke. It takes time to leach back through the economic system, to be taxed out of existence, and for the rate of US dollar growth to taper off. And I would expect that over the course of the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot more of that. Trump, for what it's worth, has actually accelerated these dynamics, not necessarily because that was his intentions, though I think in part the effects of his policy decisions, particularly on the dollar and its relative exchange value globally, does align with some of his ambitions, and that is to reduce American imports. And with a weaker dollar, you will certainly see reduced American imports. The irony of all of this is that Trump at the same time also wants a strong dollar for political power reasons. And this is a classic example of the contradictory policy ambitions that the Trump administration is trying to achieve all at the same time. Now, the circle doesn't square, of course, and that is leading to, I think, a whole bunch of policy discontent, political frustration, because the promises aren't materializing in the real world. And of course, in that space, particularly as the Trump administration responds in, I guess, what you'd call quite a violent and unpredictable, capricious way globally, as it lashes out at all and sundry, everyone else really needs to accelerate the ways in which they principally protect themselves from that. That's really the first thing. I mean, BRICS and all of these institutions emerged principally to protect countries from the madness and to create ways in which countries can just advance their own developmental interests, as well as security interests, which is what the SCO was originally about. So I think that the events in Tianjin in the last 48 hours, together with the parade that will be held, well, very soon, actually, in about half an hour's time, will, in a sense, is a punctuation mark on long-term transformations that will continue to unfold, sometimes faster and sometimes slower, but there is no turning back from this pathway towards intensified multipolarity.
Yeah. So I wanted to come back to you, Carl, because the panic has already started on the US side, and this goes across the political spectrum. The Trump administration, of course, is the one in power, but the panic has already started about the strengthening of BRICS through this summit that happened in Tianjin, China. And I want to just play both Peter Navarro and then former National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan of the Biden administration. This is Peter Navarro, the trade advisor to Donald Trump, who is a very vocal voice against BRICS. Here we go.
So I would look. Modi's a great leader. I don't understand why he's getting to bed with Putin and Xi Jinping when he's the biggest democracy in the world. So I would just simply say to the Indian people, please understand what's going on here. You got Brahmins profiteering at the expense of the Indian people. We need that to stop.
So Jake Sullivan essentially, though, answers that question, that colorful and outright insensitive question that Peter Navarro brought up. Here's what Jake Sullivan had to say about China and what is actually going on.
China has moved ahead of the United States in popularity in a whole lot of countries. And that was not the case 1 year ago, where countries now are basically, saying the US brand is in the toilet and China's looking like, actually, in a bizarre way, a more responsible player. So that's one of the big things that I hear from my friends who continue to work in these governments in Europe, in Asia. Take a look at India as another example. I mean, here's a country that on a bipartisan basis, we were working to try to build a deeper and more sustainable relationship with. And the China challenge loomed large in that. Now you've got President Trump executing a massive trade offensive against them. And the Indians are saying, well, shit, I guess maybe we have to go show up in Beijing and sit with the Chinese because we got to hedge against America. So this hedging
you got
against the United
Scott Bessent out there
States
threatening the Indians instead of the Russians. That's the big stick that they're using in the Russia negotiation. It's like, well,
so Carl, your reaction to this kind of panic, because despite the panic, it doesn't seem to reverse policy per se. Your assessment?
Well, Peter Navarro should have just stopped when he said, "I don't understand." I mean, that's a truest statement. He does not understand, and a lot of the problem of the U.S. empire facing right now is self-inflicted. This whole about face turn on India, which caught the Indian elite by surprise, and because they thought they had a very solid relationship with Trump. Modi, worked tirelessly to try to make sure to get on the good side of Trump, but it all came crash down as at the end of as a result of the recent Indian-Pakistan conflict. A couple of things that happened. First is that India has seen Pakistan has welcomed Trump's intervention and sing praise of Trump for being the mediator and nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, Trump, that's how you play Trump to Trump's ego, right? You just got to butter him up a little bit, and that led to warming of ties between Pakistan and United States. On the other hand, India had vehemently denied any role Trump played in the ceasefire, and this did not please Trump because Trump really wanted that Nobel Peace Prize. This is one of the reasons that Trump has turned against India. But another reason is because, as Jake Sullivan said, there has been a bipartisan effort to bring India onto the anti-China bandwagon of Quad. And what the Pakistan-Indian conflict showed was Pakistan, which relied heavily on the Chinese weapon system, 80% of its weapon systems are purchased from China, managed to humiliate India in the first day of aerial battle. So in Trump's eyes, that lowers the stock profile of India. Like, what good is India that to us then if you are being defeated by Pakistan with Chinese weapons? How can we count on you to counteract against China? This again for Trump. Trump is a very transactional president, and he also like to prey on weakness. He saw that India is at a moment of weakness, and he pounced on that. And he thought he tried to use by pressuring India over purchase Russian oil, trying to use that as a leverage in his negotiation against Vladimir Putin in ending the conflict in Ukraine, but on U.S. terms. What Trump administration don't understand is they don't get to dictate terms to Russia. Russia is already winning on the battlefield. You cannot get through via negotiation what you lost in the battlefield. And Trump is not in a position. United States is not in a position right now to dictate term of peace to Russia. And what U.S. has proposed to Russia is a simple ceasefire. Russia wants something more. They want a guarantee that NATO will stay out of Ukraine, and that's the whole reason Russia launched the special military operation. They don't want another ceasefire like Minsk 1 or Minsk 2, which the West just used that opportunity to rearm Ukraine to start the conflict down the road. That would defeat the whole purpose. So Russia was very clear on what they wanted, and for whatever reason, Trump administration were not able to meet them halfway. Instead, Trump is playing hardball by trying to pressure Russia by pressuring India, and that led to the whole BRICS meeting we just saw in Tianjin. And by the way, there was a lot of I agree with Professor Da Wei. It's very important for the BRICS member nation to promote people-to-people exchange. And we saw a concrete result of that after SCO summit. China just announced that for the first time, they're going to extend visa-free status to Russian citizens. Start from September 15th, for 1 year. They're going to start the trial for a visa-free policy to extend to Russian citizens. They can visit China visa-free for 30 days, and on energy cooperation. This U.S. make a big deal over purchasing Russian oil and gas. China actually has increased its purchase of Russian energy this year, and then finally both sides signed the agreement to build the Power Siberia 2, which will connect the gas field of Yamal Peninsula, which set in the Russian Arctic Circle, and pipe that gas all the way to China. Now, why this is important is because the Yamal Peninsula gas originally was supposed to be piped via Nord Stream to EU, and thanks for one of the spectacular state-sponsored terrorism against critical German infrastructure, Nord Stream was blown up. So now all the gas that would have gone to Europe will now be piped to China, and those once those gas goes east, they're not going back west, and EU is done. They got freezed out. They're literally getting freezed out the Russian gas right now, and those pipelines and the energy deal, these are multi-generational exercise in partnership building. You'll bind Russia and China even closer together. And this is important because among the BRICS members, there's a lot of energy producers. China is one of the largest energy consumer, but there's many members of the BRICS who are energy producer, like the Gulf countries, like Russia. And as Professor Warwick mentioned, they don't need United States. You already have China being the manufacturing superpower that's making everything. And then you have all these energy producers. They can trade among themselves. And U.S. just make it even more and more difficult to continue to trade in the U.S. dollars. The reason everyone used U.S. dollar before, it was because it was commonly accepted currency and everybody used it. So that made it easy for everyone to adopt. When United States starts throwing sanctions around and it attached a very heavy cost of doing transaction US dollar, that will encourage everybody to move away from the US dollar and trade in the local currency. And that's exactly what happened after they took Russia off the SWIFT system and sanctioned Russia. There's a lot of the current trade, a lot of trades being settled in local currencies, in rubles, in RMB, etc. And that makes US less relevant in the global commerce scene. And US is right now, I think what's happening is the Washington elite, they're trying to restart Cold War. They thought, okay, we understood how Cold War 1.0 went. We separate the world between the Soviet camp and the Western camp, and the Soviet Union collapsed. So we know how to win that. So all we got to do is just bring the Cold War back, do a Cold War 2.0, and then we're going to collapse China and Russia and Iran, and we're going to continue to rule the world. But what's really happening is U.S. is constructing this wall around itself and around its European vassal states, while the rest of the world is moving on with their multilateral arrangement, with China building global connectivity with their Belt and Road initiatives, and more importantly, China is no longer behind the West in the tech development. Chinese AI is already at parity, if not ahead of the U.S. AI development. So what's going to, and China now have abundant energy. The people in the BRICS countries now have abundant source of energy because China has made solar panels so cheap. Now there's a lot of global South countries, particularly in Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, they're adopting wider adoption of solar power generation. And so there's a whole movement toward electrification that's been pushed, that's been powered by China's so-called overcapacity. Whereas in the United States, Donald Trump has gone the opposite. He said, we don't want all these solar nonsense. That's all environmental BS. We're gonna drill, baby, drill. We're gonna go 100% into hydrocarbon. So what we're gonna have, what end up happening is, U.S. and its European vassals sitting behind their wall. They're increasingly getting stuck in the past, in the fossilized, literally fossilized past based on fossil fuel. And whereas China, the rest of the world, is moving on with a new energy future. And as Professor Warwick has pointed out, the civilizational progress fundamentally comes down to exploitation and utilization of energy. And you get the huge jump in progress when a new energy source is being utilized. Just like during Industrial Revolution, when the world started to switch to fossil fuel, to coal, and then later oil, and that led a huge jump in the quality of life all over the world. And now we're witnessing a very similar movement that's been pioneered by China. And one of the problems with solar, wind, and all these alternative energy, sustainable energy sources in the past was energy storage. You can, because the solar, wind, they're not stable, are stable source of energy, and so you're not gonna, you don't have generation when there's no sun or when there's no wind. So you still have to build fossil fuel power generation plant to load balancing. But as China making batteries cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, we're at a cusp when it's possible to capture the vast amount of solar energy now we can access through the solar panels, now be captured with battery storage. So what US think they're gonna be replay Cold War 1.0 with the Soviet collapse and the collapse of the Western Bloc. It's gonna play out exactly opposite. The US will be left behind while the rest of the world will keep moving.
Yeah, Dr. Dawei, from China's perspective, especially in the realm of both security and economic development, how does it react to these kind of comments by, for example, Peter Navarro, who essentially scorns the rest of the world, and in this case India, for getting closer? How dare they get closer to China? How does China see this and react to this and move based on this kind of behavior, because it signals a larger geopolitical context?
Yeah, I think for me, I feel there is kind of double standard thing. The U.S. The Trump administration recently had quite flexible diplomacy. Let's say President Trump met with President Putin in Alaska, and President Trump himself, for several times, I think he posted on social media too, basically say he want to meet with DPRK leader Kim Jong-un. So I mean, the U.S. diplomacy is not now based on, let's say, ideology or values. As a researcher, I think this is very interesting development. So if a leader believe this is your national interest, then you have very flexible diplomatic posture. It could help sometimes. But the problem is, back to Peter Navarro's comments, you cannot say it is correct that US do this, but it's not correct China do this. I mean, for me, this is kind of double standard thing. So I think in the United States and to some extent in Europe, there is this kind of feeling that, if we do this, this is correct because this is we do, because it's us, right? And if you do that, it's not correct because you are not a Western democracy. I don't understand this logic, to be honest. And I also have to emphasize another thing. So actually, Jake Sullivan touch upon this. I mean, in at least this year, from the policy, no matter domestic policy or foreign policy, China looks more predictable and stable than the Trump administration. So we have not created big surprise to any countries, and actually I think it's even Russia, India. I think this country also they are more predictable. No matter you agree with their policy or not. I mean, many countries, I think maybe they do not agree with Russian, on this conflict in Ukraine. But I mean, the logic of Putin is predictable, even you disagree with him. And I think the reaction from Modi, from India, is also something very predictable. So this predictability is something really important in international relations, in international politics. So I think that's what Jake Sullivan touched upon. I mean, the U.S. has changed too many. Has their policy is so unpredictable in recent days. So make other countries feel they need to strengthen cooperation together to try to inject predictability and stability to the international relations. So it's not only, I think, on the West media, there is a tendency to view this recent diplomatic changes, including SCO summit and today's military parade, as getting together of China, Iran, Russia, GPRK. I think that view is too narrowed. Yeah, these countries are in Beijing, but we also have other countries. We have leaders from central states. We have leaders from Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN countries. I think that's very interesting. Particularly, I mean, the news is that Indonesian president, Prabowo, right? I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce his name correctly, but I mean, yeah, he left China because of domestic situation, right? He left China and were absent from the SCO summit yesterday, but he flew back to Beijing earlier today for the military parade. So Indonesia is a big country, the largest country in Southeast Asian in Southeast Asia, and based on the Western criteria, Indonesia is a democratic country. So but I think here the identity is not about the ideology that or it's not about value. It's about development. It's about development of their own country and the international interest of Indonesia. They believe that it's important for them. Of course, I believe they also want to maintain good relations with the US and the West. But we share a lot of common position and a common interest. So he tried to overcome the domestic challenges and flew back to meet all other leaders in Beijing. So this is a getting together of the developing country, of the emerging markets, of the non-Western countries, and to be honest, I think the policy of the United States has accelerated these changes. So yeah, I think this is our view. I mean, if we look at the situation, and try to avoid this double standard, I think this is. I will give I think this diplomacy in Beijing and Tianjin, of course, good, and I think it's very flexible diplomacy. But I'm also with great interest watching the changes in the United States, how they interact with other countries, right? With Russia, with Ukraine, with maybe potentially with North Korea in the future. So this is a different time. This is as we discussed earlier, era of multipolarity. So we need a diplomacy of multipolarity. Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Powell, your thoughts on all of this.
I know Carl's got to go soon, so I'm going to keep it brief so that he can have a quick final word. Look, I think that there is no doubt that the transformations that are happening at the moment and which have accumulated over the last 10 or 15 or even 20 years has led to the United States in particular to lose its moorings, not to mention the elite in Brussels. The sense of directionlessness in this unfolding multipolar environment is causing policy panic and really an approach to the rest of the world that reflects a very deep sense of displacement anxiety. Now, this displacement anxiety is having both international implications in terms of creating unpredictability and instability for others, where to a point where other countries simply cannot engage with the United States in good faith because what they say one day changes the next. And of course, it's also lending itself to significant domestic instabilities and tensions because the fundamental issues that are currently impacting the United States are actually not global issues, but deeply domestic issues where 40 years of neoliberal experimentation has failed to live up to the promise. So the promise of the American dream has become an unfolding nightmare for a growing majority of people.
Yeah, and Carl, perhaps I know you don't have a lot of time, but perhaps you can close out by helping us open with my last segment, which is actually about the Power of Siberia type pipeline that was just inked between Putin and Xi Jinping on this visit. So Putin stayed for 4 whole days. He was staying for 4 whole days in China. And a big part of it was not the SCO summit, but actually their bilateral talks, which occurred not only at the sidelines of the SCO, but also in Xi Jinping's personal residence. So, Carl, talk about this and the significance of this.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, the Power Siberia 2 binds the two nations together. This is not I mean, because together with an agreement to construct the pipeline comes with multi-year agreement on purchasing of Russian gas. That just binds the two nations' energy policies together. This is a multi-generational partnership building exercise. The Power Siberia 2 negotiation actually dragged out for a long time, over pricing and over the route because Russia wanted to build through Mongolia, but China didn't want the pipeline to go through Mongolia to go through to transit through a third country because China didn't want to deal with the uncertainty of having this vital energy link to going through to a third country, but in the end this deal was done. I think both sides recognize despite their differences, they need to make some compromises to make this work. As Professor Da Wei has pointed out, these countries among BRICS, they have their own individual differences, but they realize it's more important to work together. For example, example is the China-India bilateral relationship. For example, I mean that they're not. China and India are not going back to the China-India honeymoon period of early 1950s, when there's a slogan called "Hindi Chini Bye Bye." The India China are brothers. Those days are gone. But the border issue is likely to be a persistent issue in the bilateral ties. But what both sides have agreed on, which is actually what China has advocated long before, is that yes, we do have our differences on the border, but we have so many other overlapping interests because we're both large, giant countries. Let's focus on areas where we can cooperate. Let's shelve our differences aside for the moment and focus on the area we can cooperate. And now, with additional pressure applied by Trump, India is coming to kind of closer to the Chinese position. Basically, okay, we'll continue to talk through our border issues. We'll agree to de-escalate, but let's focus on building cooperation in the area that we could work on. For example, in trade, because India do need a lot of infrastructure, not a lot of investment. India has lifted a lot of restrictions on the Chinese investment into the country that was put in place after the 2020 border clash. And that this is obviously a welcoming development. India and China are going to resume direct flight that was suspended during COVID. China has opened up the border crossing for the Indian religious pilgrims to visit Mount Kailash in Tibet, and the more people to people exchange is always good, just like what's already happening between China and Russia with the visa free policies. The Russian parliament also said, now that China offering visa free policy to Russia is also considering offer a trial period for offering visa free travel to the Chinese citizens. This is only going to promote more understanding between the citizens of these countries, and this, which is the sharp contrast to what's going on with the U.S. right now. I mean, Professor Warwick has been very diplomatic when he says the U.S. has lost its moral bearings, mooring in the last few decades. But I actually appreciate Donald Trump for the honesty he brings to the U.S. foreign affairs messaging. Whereas before you have President Biden and President Obama, they're trying to sugarcoat the U.S. empire as building a partnership, and Trump straight out and ripped emperor's clothes and says, okay, give us oil, give us gold, give us your resources, and we are and what he did, this whole tariff war he waged against everyone, regardless was perceived adversaries or supposedly partners like the Europeans and India. It shows that U.S. as the U.S. empire has no partners, has no allies. It only has vassals. That's why Trump demand everyone to come to Washington to bend the knee and kiss the ring. And now he's getting pushback. The pushback is, so I expect the BRICS members will be able to come together and form a united front, because individually they might be at a weaker position to negotiate a bilateral trade deal with U.S. But if they can come together and to negotiate as a bloc, they will have much more bargaining power. And I expect that will start to take place, because now Lula just recently called for an emergency meeting of the BRICS. And so I expect more concrete announcement in the coming month. But I really got to go to run to the immigration office. And thank you very much for inviting me to the show. And I will be watching the Chinese parade on my phone on my way to the immigration office, because I know it's going to be a great parade.
All right, Carl. Thanks. Well, appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, gentlemen. How are you feeling? Got a little bit more time? Not too much. I wanted to get your voices in a bit more before we head out of here today. So I wanted to continue on this trend that we are seeing with the Trump administration in particular, how it continues to essentially isolate the United States. Geopolitical analyst Alex Cristoforo wrote this in response to another set of comments that Peter Navarro made. He is making comment after comment in reaction to this kind of BRICS surge we saw at the SEO summit, uniting BRICS, détente, China and India, Modi, Xi, Putin, RIC, SEO Development Bank, give this man a peace prize. And here is another iteration of Navarro's kind of hysteria in response to these developments.
The road to peace in many ways runs at least partly through New Delhi. It's time for Modi to step up. I have great respect for Modi. I love the Indian people. It was a shame to see Modi getting in bed as the leader of the biggest democracy in the world with the two biggest authoritarian dictators in the world, in Putin and Xi Jinping. That doesn't make any sense. I'm not sure what he's thinking, particularly since India has been in a Cold War and sometimes a hot war with China for decades. So we hope that the Indian leader comes around to seeing that he needs to be with us in Europe and Ukraine and not with Russia on this.
So a key point here is Ukraine. Maybe I could go to you first, Dr. Powell. A key point here is Ukraine. Ukraine has changed a lot about the geopolitical situation worldwide, and much of Donald Trump's administration, in terms of its economic war, tariffs, etc., have been directed toward so-called allies of Russia who are supposedly aiding and abetting the Russian effort in Ukraine. So talk about this overall trend of essentially isolating the United States in order to achieve this geopolitical objective, which seems farther and farther away.
The United States has a very confused position in relation to Ukraine. I think the dominant position that has been in place now for a number of decades is to try to bring Ukraine closer to the collective Western position and ultimately secure Ukraine as part of NATO on Russia's border. That has been the long-term strategic ambition articulated and pursued through many administrations. Trump has brought a slight variation to that theme, but ultimately, I think in the end, despite protestations to the contrary, the policy trajectory from the administration in large part is to prolong the war on Russia's border, even in the face of realities that the collective West and NATO in particular are losing the war of attrition on the ground. Insofar as the defeat is reflected in growing human casualties, particularly on the Ukrainian side, seems largely immaterial to the Western powers, some of whom, as we know, have said from day one that this is the greatest investment that they've ever made. So from their point of view, the people of Ukraine are expendable resources as part of a broader geopolitical game plan. The fact that Ukraine and the conflict there has crystallized into this war that has now raged explicitly for almost 4 years really, I think, speaks to the broader geopolitical dynamics that we've been talking about today. The United States is experiencing and witnessing what is in effect a strategic defeat in Ukraine for the collective West. And it's being defeated at a system versus system level. The defeat reflects the shortage of human resource. The tragedy is the number of deaths that have occurred over the last 3.5 years, to add on to the many that were killed in the attacks on the Donbass in the years before. The Western military machines have struggled to recruit people to populate their militaries. Germany is now talking about having to have compulsory military service for some of its citizens, and the United States military has had massive problems in recruiting and retaining skilled people. The plethora of weapon systems that have been thrown into the mix over the course of the last 3.5 years, each one with the promise that it was going to be the Wunderwaffe that would transform the balance of battle, they've all come to nothing. They've all been exposed for the limitations that invariably they have in both qualitative terms, that they're not penetrating. Russian air defense has responded and has adequately adapted to many of the systems that have been thrown at it and have ultimately bested them. The innovations taking place on a daily basis in terms of drone warfare and related matters is also clearly in Russia's favor. And we now see that the Western military industrial system simply doesn't have the wherewithal to replenish what has been used up, not only on the battlefields of Ukraine, but also what happened in the Israel-Iran situation that took place recently. So right across the board, the United States is staring at a strategic defeat along with its Western partners. That has really thrown a spanner into the works. And you see this in the reactions and the body language and the rhetoric coming from people close to the administration and the decisions that the administration are making and the flip-flopping that the administration seems to exhibit. on a regular basis. And these are all signs of a world that is unfolding in ways that are not in the interests as calculated by the powers that be in Washington. And there is a deep frustration at the displacement that they've been party to. Nobody wants to be the captain of the sinking ship. And we've seen the United States administrations in times past respond to military defeats or the inevitability of military defeats by seeking to extend the battle so that the political fallout is carried by a subsequent administration. Nobody wants to be responsible for the humiliation and the catastrophe of military defeat, especially against an opponent that had been described as, in this case, nothing more than a gas station masquerading as a country whose military was run by drunks and was populated by subhuman people, subhuman animals, in effect. We've had many words used to describe the Russian military, all of which serve to firstly dehumanize an opponent, which is quite a natural piece of political propaganda in wartime. But what that in effect did was that it led to a chronic underestimation of the capabilities of the Russian military to respond to the circumstances of early and mid 2022 and ultimately prosecute a systematic attrition warfare aimed fairly and squarely at demilitarizing Ukraine, denazifying Ukraine, and ultimately forcing the Western powers to the table to consider not just a ceasefire, but to revisit the entire fabric of the security relationships and institutions that have been in place in Western Europe. So it is a transformational event set against the broader backdrop, and it is reverberating right across the world, because I think, and I'll just briefly end on this note, the experiences and what people can see and read about in terms of the battles and wars in Ukraine are being viewed by many across Asia, where NATO seems to want to project itself as well, as clear warnings that this particular model of global security is not viable, and that in fact a model based on this American notion of security through strength is ultimately a myth, and is a recipe for instability and increases the risk of bloodshed. And people in Asia increasingly, I think, are of a mind to reject it. And that's why gatherings like the SCO, gatherings like ASEAN, the military parade that's taking place in Beijing today to commemorate the 80th anniversary of victory over global fascism and Japanese aggression in Asia, are fantastic reminders of people about why peace building is actually something that we need to be all committed to. And it's actually hard work, and it can't be done when you've got other countries in the world carrying on as if they can just dictate terms to everyone else. That's actually a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and Dr. Dahui, I wanted to get your reaction to this in the context of, one of the things that came out of the SCO summit that I thought was striking was this global governance initiative, which Xi Jinping has outlined. And one of the interesting concepts that might come to a shock to many in the West, especially the United States, is this idea of staying committed to sovereign equality. So I find that to be a very useful term, and one that should be outlined here, because what Peter Navarro outlined at the beginning of this segment, Dr. Dahui, is the opposite of sovereign equality. It's essentially telling other countries what to do based on what the U.S. wants them to do. And that seems to not be working as well as maybe it had worked in the past, if it ever did. So how does China's a global governance initiative that it outlined at the SCO summit, how does it differ from this approach, and what do you mark as its significance?
I think it's quite interesting. This is the fourth initiative that Chinese government has, raised in recent years, from global, security initiative, development initiative, civilization initiative. Now have the governance initiative. So I think Chinese government, of course, try to in this changing world, try to elaborate China's position and China's aspiration clearly, explicitly. And I think this one, the global governance initiative, is interesting, and it's important. I have to say it's very important because we are witnessing a period of changing international order. I think we all agree, no matter how you define it, but the international order is changing, and the old laws, norms, rules has kind of a lot of them has been changed or or abandoned. So this is a word now, lack of the rules and the norms, and sometimes some rules are just be abandoned, and many multilateral institutions have been weakened. Like for instance, WTO has been weakened. UN has been weakened. WHO has been weakened. So these multilateral institutions are now not very effective, and China criticized the United States for violating international law, not only in the U.S., for instance, Israel, and of course, U.S. criticized China. So obviously, we don't have a consensus over what set of rules should we follow, and who are changing the rules, and what kind of order are we going to build in the future. So we are in a chaotic period. So against this backdrop, I think China raises development global governance initiative. Basically list the principles that that China feel important for the future order building. So of course those are still quite rough principles. It need to, like the other three initiatives, I think those are the framework. Those are the frameworks that we still need to fill in more contents. But those principles are the kind of cornerstones for the future international order that China envisioned. So, as you mentioned, the first of the principle is the equality of the sovereign equality, right? Sovereign equality. This is not new. This is something in the UN Charter, and we all agree that all the sovereign countries are equal country. They should be treated equally, fairly. But the reality has been like all animals are equal, but some of them are more equal than others. I think this is the feeling of many people in developing world, in non-Western world, including I myself, and we can read it out from for instance Peter Navarro's comments about about India's diplomatic changes or effort. So China advocate for a more a true equality of all the sovereign states. The international order should not be monopolized by big countries and Western countries. So all other countries need to have their own voices be heard. I think the SCO summit and the BRICS and other mechanisms provide or inject the voice of non-Western country into the world stage. And in the future, as their power grows, I think in the international order building process, this concept, these voices will be heard and need to be heard.
Yeah, and as we move toward the end here, I just wanted to pull up a few images, Warwick, that I think outline this difference, which I think is part of the reason why Donald Trump and Donald Trump's administration is behaving in a certain way. So at the SCO summit, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and the head of state of Mongolia all met in order to not only go over their ties together, but also ink, which was and is a historic pipeline deal. And this is our friend Carl Zha, who says Russia and China finally signed this agreement of Power Siberia 2 gas pipeline. And here you see, in order to get this deal done, this pipeline has to run through Mongolia. So it outlines a lot of what Dr. Dahui said here, which is, while this isn't a new concept, I think this kind of way of relating to the world makes the Donald Trump administration, but not even to just highlight the Trump administration. This has been a policy of the United States for quite some time, which is to try to thwart these efforts. So what is the significance of, like, what are the concrete and material benefits of the way that China is doing diplomacy that we saw at the SCO summit and really the entirety of BRICS? And what do you see as the root cause of why the Trump administration reacts to it so negatively?
Well, I think one of the reasons why the Trump administration reacts negatively is that China refuses to be provoked, and it responds to most of these attempted provocations in a very calm and deliberate manner. It also works to its own rhythms and to its own pace, and so when the United States seeks to hurry through so-called agreements or imaginary deals or napkin deals, China refuses to play along. China is interested in meaningful agreements between countries and ones in which countries will seek to abide by. And that means addressing the issues at a level of detail and with a level of seriousness and candor that I think often the folk in Washington find very frustrating. You know, they're looking for rapid announceables that will play well in social media and which will translate into political upticks amongst the electoral base, but which nonetheless don't ultimately lead to meaningful and actionable agreements. So that's one of the reasons why I think that there is a certain level of transactional frustration. The broader issues, though, I think is that China has been emerging as a great country and a great civilization once again, and it has had to develop ways in which it can become a great power in the world that is reflective of its own recent experiences over the last 150 years to 200 years, and how it brings those experiences to the table as far as how it conducts itself. And I think we find that manifest in two really important ways. Firstly, there is an emphasis on consensus building, and that creates an environment in which parties to agreements actually own the agreements. They have come to those agreements by working with each other through processes of give and take, so that whatever the end outcome is something that hasn't been imposed by a third party or from up high, but is something that is developed organically through the interactions of the parties involved. Doing things this way leads to more sustainable outcomes because there has been collective commitment to the consensus. But of course, it also requires more time and effort, and the ability to bring patience to the table, I think, is something that China has exhibited on a routine basis, which again contrasts with the kind of approaches which the Western powers, and particularly the United States, have demonstrated over many years. The other aspect of China emerging as a great power is that it is demonstrating an ability to be a great enabling power. And this contrasts with the experiences of 500 years of colonial exploitation, where the dominant powers, the great powers of the time, have been expropriating powers. They have gone into peripheral countries and have sought to exploit the resources and the people of those peripheral countries to garner wealth for the elite of the central country. China's approach is to empower other countries, to enable them to become more sovereign in terms of real capability. The energy issue is a classic case in point, where energy sovereignty is foundational to the ability of nations and communities to pursue their own development without fear that someone else is going to turn the lights out on them. And China's capacity in terms of renewable energy in particular, but also more conventional forms of energy, whether they be nuclear or fossil fuel-based energy solutions, is enabling other countries to become more energy capable and energy sovereign. China's doing the same thing in digital infrastructure, where it has, where Chinese companies have, for instance, in the artificial intelligence space, released foundational models as open source, free to download and implement resources that other organizations and countries in the world can use. And this is an important part of, again, empowering others to take advantage of China's capacity building. And the last thing that I'll mention, and this really touches on the people-to-people exchanges that Dawei has emphasized, is that China has also committed to expanding its education and training resourcing and support for people in developing countries in the global south. And ultimately, training people and educating people is critical to the ability of countries to develop their own sovereign capabilities. And this really reflects China's own experiences, not only the long-term experience of the centrality of education as a pathway to working in government or wherever, but in more recent times, the criticality of raising the literacy and numeracy levels right across the vast country, so as to enable people across the country to transform their own communities and their own regions, so as to reduce poverty. So they're the key things that I think exemplify China's approach as an emerging great power.
Dr. Dawei, you are the first guest here. I want to give you the first time here. I want to give you the last word. So please, whatever you want to impart to our audience before we head out, it's your time.
Yeah. Again, back to our earlier point. In this discussion, this is a time of multipolarity. So if it's a real multipolarity, multipolarity does not only mean, does not only mean the new distribution of power. It does not only mean the share burden thing. Multipolarity, of course, different countries are. I mean, not only those bigger countries like China, India, Russia, US, Indonesia, Nigeria, and the smaller country. I mean, mid-sized power and the smaller country all have their own voices. And some smaller countries, they do, academically we call it a veto power. Maybe they cannot force the big power to do something, but the bigger power it's become more and more difficult to force them to do something. I think that's a good thing for this, sovereign equality thing. So this is a multipolar world. So then the diplomacy will go, towards that direction. We'll see more multipolar diplomacy like we have seen in past 1 week, particularly the SCO summit, this meeting between among so many countries, and noticeably, of course, India, China, Russia leaders. I think this is, but I want to say this is not a, West versus non-West. It's not a, confrontation or competition between two camps. I think we should not take it as, those countries, I mean, China, Russia, India now work together against the West. I don't think so. I think maybe a few days later, who knows? I mean, Russian leader could talk to Americans again. India may reach some agreement or truce with India. With the United States. And the Chinese and American officials are still talking about a potential China-US summit later this fall, maybe. So this is a multipolar diplomacy. So we talk to each other. Our power are more evenly distributed. And we have different all the countries have different policy agenda, different policy priority. And different values. They agree on something, but they disagree on some other things. So then we have this more diplomatic, the multipolar diplomacy. I think this is a reality that we need to get used to it, rather than criticizing some countries. Say, why do you talk to each other? Why you have not come to us and talk to me? I think this is the old mindset of the no matter unipolar or bipolar world. So with that, I think I watch all the development in Tianjin and Beijing this week with great interest. But I think there will be more to come in other countries. I think this is the new world, new reality. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think that's a great place to end here today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Be sure to hit the like button before you go to keep this stream going in YouTube's algorithm. Thank you, Dr. Powell. Thank you, Dr. Da Wei. And thank you for your first time on this show. I want to thank Jane for giving this a bit of support. And without further ado, everyone, you can find all the places to support this channel in the video description. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon, and I'll go public with that very soon. But in the meantime, hit the like button, share this, and I'll be back again with all of you again soon. Bye-bye.